Jesus and his entourage of not quite 12 guys yet enter the room, and as they enter, there's a commotion. You can hear the background noise. It's kind of a dull roar, and it seems kind of like chaos going on there. You hear the clink of money being exchanged, the rustle of bags being filled, and Jesus stands at the entrance and he begins to scan the room. His eyes land on the one man no one wants to speak to. In the corner behind the table, you see a man in a purple V-neck shirt, some chest hair poking out. There's a gold chain that hangs around his neck, a gold bracelet around his wrist. They're there to show his wealth, but really they're more of a symbol of what he actually is: a swindler, an extortioner. Jesus' eyes lands on the man and he says, him. Peter looks up at Jesus, him? Okay, Jesus, whatever, you're the boss. And the group begins to walk towards the tax table. And that's the scene for our story today. If you have your Bibles with you, open up to Luke chapter 5. If you're new to this Bible thing, the Bible's broken up into two parts. There's the Old Testament, the New Testament. You're gonna look for the guys' names in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke. That's where we're gonna be. If you have one of the house Bibles, it is on page 8 something. 861, there it is. 861. And as always, if you don't have a Bible, we would love that to just be our gift to you. Take that home, mark it up right in that Bible. As you're turning there, if you haven't been with us the last couple weeks, we're in this series called Beyond the Fence, kind of how to neighbor. And first week, Chris talked about what it means to love God and what it means to love people. Last week, Brett talked about what it means to really have compassion for your neighbor. And if you missed any of those, you can always check them out on our website. I'm so excited about today. Luke chapter 5. Are you guys there? All right, it's gonna be good. Here we go. Luke chapter 5, verse 27. And he went out and he saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said, "Follow me." After leaving everything, he rose and followed him. You guys see what's going on here? That'd be like today me walking up to a loan shark or a used car salesman. Sorry if there's any used car salesmen in the audience. But it's that same idea, like the people that are known for ripping other people off. Jesus walks up to this man and he says, "Follow me." And it's not that the tax collector couldn't have changed. It's not that the tax collector couldn't follow Jesus, but there's an immediacy to his change that's interesting. It says he left everything. He left behind his career, his friends, his family. He dropped all of that to follow Jesus. Imagine if one of the pastors of the church walked up to you and be like, "Hey, I want you to come work for the church full time. Just drop all you're doing, everything you're doing, and just come work for us full time." You might get paid, you might not. And immediately you're like, "I'm in." It's a huge, immediate change. See, let me tell you a little bit about tax collectors, because tax collectors weren't liked. They weren't the friendly guys. What would happen is a tax collector would go to the Roman government and they would bid. They would say, "I think I could get 40,000 out of the people this year." And the highest bidder would become the lead tax collector, the head tax collector. And everybody else then would be employed by that man. And then he would go around to businesses, to homes, to the people of Israel, and he would begin to collect taxes. Think mafia style. Think I'm in your store, like, give me your money or I'm gonna break your kid's leg. Because see, at the end of the day, if he ended up with 60,000, 70,000, 80,000, he would pay that 40,000 to the Roman government and he'd keep the rest. See, tax collectors were hated by everybody. They were hated by the Romans because the Romans thought those tax collectors were cheapskates. Yeah, you can get more out of the people. They were hated by the Jewish people because the Romans were the oppressors, and you're taking money from us to give to our oppressors? Tax collectors were hated. One more quick note. You might hear me call Levi Matthew or Matthew Levi. They're kind of interchangeable. Both of them are this man's name. In the other gospels that tell the same story, that he's called Matthew. In this gospel, he's called Levi. Levi was his Hebrew name and Matthew was his Greek name. So Jesus approaches this guy, Levi. And you got to understand, he's breaking all kinds of social taboos. You don't talk to tax collectors. You don't associate with tax collectors. And yet Jesus approaches this guy and says, hey, follow me. Come be my disciple. This is a coveted position. This is something that people would and students would spend their whole lives trying to achieve. I want to be the disciple of a rabbi. And Jesus offers this to this nothing, no man tax collector. And it says that Matthew left everything to follow him. That's so crazy. It makes me wonder, was it because he just felt alone? He knew he was hated by the Jews. He knew he was hated by the Romans. He just wanted a place to belong. Maybe he started to realize that money wasn't everything. We're not told, but we're told that he left everything to follow Jesus. Let's see what happens next. Verse 29. And Levi made a great feast in his house. There was a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at the table with him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. See, eating in this day is a very, very intimate thing. And when we think reclining at the table, we often think of, sitting back with our friends and chatting. And that's not what would have happened here. What would have been happening is they would have been laying down in close proximity. They would have been sharing food. It's a very, very intimate setting. You don't eat with just anybody. You don't share a meal with just anybody. Sure, if somebody came over, you might have some snacks or some stuff, but to share a meal, that only happened with really close family. That only happened with really close friends. And so the Pharisees get upset. Why are you sharing this intimate moment with a tax collector? I think sometimes we give the Pharisees a bad rap. But I don't think we're much different than them. Imagine if one of your close friends began to start becoming friends with drug addicts or gangbangers or prostitutes. Wouldn't you as their friend go to them and be like, hey, what are you doing? You shouldn't be associating with those people. Don't become friends with them. See, I think the Pharisees were doing what they thought was right. Jesus was a rabbi. He was a teacher of the faith. People looked up to him. And they were going, Jesus, you can't do this. You're going to give us all a bad name. And Jesus responds, it's not the healthy that need a hospital, it's the sick. He looks at him, he's like, church people don't need church. They're going to come anyway. They get this. But what about the outcasts? What about the downtrodden? What about the people that count out? Aren't they the ones that need me? Let me make a disclaimer here. If you don't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, this sounds backwards. I understand. It sounds crazy. Sometimes the things that Jesus say sound weird. And I get it. I'll agree. They sound weird to me sometimes too. And so I want to give you an out. If you don't believe some of this stuff, that's okay. It's okay to not believe, but I will tell you this, what Jesus says works. What Jesus tells us works. And so I would ask you to give it a shot. Pick and choose, try, ask questions, jump in. But at the end of the day, if you walk out of here and you're like, man, those Christians are crazy, and you just want to talk about that over lunch, that's totally cool. And you can invite me along for that conversation because I think we're kind of nuts sometimes too. So I love the way Craig Groeschel puts this. He's a pastor at another church, and he says this. He says, we'll do anything short of sin to reach people for Christ. To reach people no one is reaching, we have to do things no one is doing. We'll do anything short of sin to reach people for Christ. To reach people no one is reaching, we have to do things no one is doing. That's what Jesus is saying here. He's saying, I didn't come for church people. I didn't come for healthy. I came for the sick. I came for the broken. I came for the people that everyone counts out. I love in our student ministries, our welcome team has a saying. And that saying is, we feel awkward so you don't have to. My welcome team's laughing over here. It's great. But I love that. We feel awkward so you don't have to. And as a welcome team, they're like, we want to take that awkwardness. It's awkward when you first meet somebody. It's awkward to step outside of your comfort zone. And they say, we want to take that awkwardness on ourselves. So that way that other person doesn't have to feel awkward. That's what we should do, isn't it? As neighbors, as people. I'm not even talking about as Christians. I don't know anybody who woke up in the morning and was like, I'm out to ruin somebody's day. I don't know, I'm sure there's a small group of people who did that, but for the most part, I think we wake up and we want to make this world a better place. We want to help people. It's in our nature, it's in our core, it's who we are. That's what I love about this series. That's what I love about this message is the idea of neighboring is so universal. Jesus does the unexpected. He approaches Levi. You didn't talk to tax collectors, and yet he approaches Levi. He meets him. And then he takes it a step further and enters his house and becomes friends with him and shares things that you only share in friendship. That in and of itself is something that we don't normally do. But then Jesus does something that starts to make me uncomfortable. Jesus risks his reputation for this man. Levi didn't owe Jesus anything. Jesus didn't owe Levi anything. And yet Jesus enters his house and risks his reputation. See, oftentimes we give Pharisees a bad rap, but you got to understand they were the good guys. Everybody looked up to the Pharisees. They were the people that other people went to when they had questions, when they had problems. They were the ones that people modeled their lives after. So when the Pharisees say, why do you do that? People listen. Jesus risks his reputation. Jesus took the awkwardness on himself. He met Matthew on his turf, and he risked his reputation for him. My question to you is, how far are you willing to go to be a neighbor? God has always had a strategy for reaching people. And that strategy has been to bless people. See, it's not about converting them. It's not a self-righteous thing. There's not an ulterior motive. It's to simply bless the other person. I think often in church, And when I say this, you got to hear, I put myself in this category just as much. So this is just as much to me as it is to everybody else. I think often we wait for the church to develop a program. We wait for the church to give us an okay to bless somebody, whether it's a mission trip or a serving opportunity or a special offering that we take. We're waiting for the okay to bless somebody. And then once we do that, we kind of check the box off and wait for the next one. Or sometimes I think our blessing somebody is based on how much they grow spiritually. I'll bless you and I want to help you, but I'm doing this so that way you know Jesus more. And we wouldn't say it this way, but if that spiritual growth stops, so does our blessing. We kind of then count them out and push them on the side. There's so many excuses. For some of us, we're just too afraid to step out and risk that. For some of us, we don't think we have the ability or the income or the resources, or sometimes our situation keeps us from doing it. We have all these excuses for not blessing people. But I think the way that Jesus does it, he flips it all upside down on its head. He says, if you're looking for the excuses, you're always going to find one. But if you step out and just bless somebody, now there's a whole new world opened. In order for us to bless somebody, we need to take that burden on ourselves. If you're stepping out to bless somebody, why would you expect them to come to you? And I think that's what Jesus is trying to say. That's why it's so backwards to us, because in the American culture, it's all about how far that we can get, how much can we attain. I mean, even when you buy a product, you're weighing, is it worth the price? And so when we step out to bless somebody, we're going, is the reward on my blessing going to be worth? We would never say it that way, but there is that instilled in us. And Jesus is saying, if you bless people just to bless them, that's how you're going to reach them. Neighboring shouldn't be an act. It should be a way of life. Neighboring shouldn't be an act. It should be a way of life. Sometimes we boil our blessing, our neighboring, our being a good person down to an act. I did that good thing, I'm good for a couple months. And I don't think we would say it that bluntly. I don't think we would even think it that bluntly. But when our blessing comes out of who we are, it totally changes the way that we view the world. The truth of the matter is, being a good neighbor isn't difficult. Now hear me right, because our fears, our emotions, those things that keep us from being a good neighbor, those are hard to overcome. But the idea, the act of being a neighbor isn't that difficult. It's not that hard. It's the things that we would mostly do by nature. And yet we don't do them because all those other things get in the way. And so I want to introduce something to you today. It's an acronym called BLESS. If you have your note sheet, this is a great time to pull it out and write down BLESS as I go through this. And here's what I know. I know that if we have a plan, I know that if we have a thing that we can work as people, we are much more likely to do something. I can throw 100 examples of why that doesn't work, but if you have a plan that you can function, it's much easier to overcome some of your own things. And so that's what I want to give you today, is I want to give you a plan. So here we go. BLESS starts this way. Begin with prayer. For those of you who were here last week, hopefully you're doing this. Brett challenged you to pray for your neighbors. If you weren't here last week, that's okay. This is a great place to start. But instead of just generally praying for your neighbors, I pray for that house over there and I pray for that over there, I would encourage you to make your prayers intentional. Pray for the family members. Pray for the things that you know are going on in their life. Pray for their work. Be intentional with your prayer. If you don't know them, pray that God would give you opportunities to be able to get to know them. The second piece of this is listen. begin to listen to their story. It's amazing what you can learn by simply listening to somebody. I admit I'm kind of bad at this. And it's not because I don't care. I'm bad at this because I do care, because I want to connect. And in doing that, somebody will tell a story and I'll be like, oh, that's totally like the time in my life when this happens. And then I start talking. Or, oh, I remember a time that reminds me of exactly when I was in a situation similar. And I don't just stop and listen often. And so my encouragement to you is, if that's you, is stop and ask a question. Easy things. You don't have to pry deep in their life, but it's as simple as, hey, how you doing? Everybody's answer to how you doing is busy. That's just generally, that's the new, I'm good. Is, how you doing? I'm busy. What's so busy? What's going on that's got you so busy? Why you been so busy? Easy, simple question. Oh, man, work has been crazy. Yeah, what's going on with work? See, now suddenly you're in a conversation. You've taken interest. And it's not, and I know it's not that you don't care, it's that nobody knows how to bridge that gap. And if you stop and ask a simple question, then it takes you to the next level. E. The E stands for eat. Barbecues, cookouts, inviting them over, lunches. If that's too big for you, maybe it's a cup of coffee. Maybe it's maybe you make a cup of coffee and go sit out with them. There's something about food that brings us together. I think there's very few people in this world that are like, hey, I've got some food for you. Do you want some? That you're like, nope. We love food. Food brings us together. Like, I don't, there's very few people that are like, no, I don't like to eat. It's just the way that it goes. Food brings us together. And so that's why the E is eat. Share a meal with somebody, eat with them. The S is for serve. What can you do to serve your neighbor? That's a question that we don't often ask without a caveat. See, that question typically is phrased, my neighbor's got a problem, how can I fix that? Or, hey, I see an easy opportunity for me to serve, how is that gonna make me look? There's normally a caveat on that, but when was the last time you asked, what can I do just to serve them? I'm raking my leaves, maybe I just go rake theirs. I don't need to. But it needs to be done, why not? That's an act of service. And finally, share your story. When it comes to sharing your story, I think there's two camps of us. There's the one hand that we want to share our story with everybody all the time. And that's not a bad thing. There's no good or bad camp in this. I just think we normally fall into two categories. Like, we always want to share a story. It's easy for us to share a story. But then there's the other part of us that we're like, I'm not sharing our story. I don't want to tell you what's going on in my life. And it's not that I don't want to. Sometimes I don't think it's going to be relevant. I don't think you're going to care. It's a risk or it hurts. There's all kinds of different things. But I want to encourage you, no matter what camp you're in, to share your story within relationship. You guys ever seen the Pentecostal street evangelists, those guys who stand on the street with signs, you're going to hell, burn the Harry Potter books, those kind of things, right? Nobody likes those guys. Even if they were 100% correct in everything they said, they still wouldn't get their point across. Because a book burning never brought anybody to Jesus. And if you're on your neighbor's lawn burning books to bring them to Jesus, you're doing it wrong. Just so you're aware, that's not the right way to do that. But that's why relationship is so important. See, those guys on the street, they might not be wrong, but they have no relationship. They're just shouting things at the top of their lungs. Suddenly, when there's relationship, your story matters. Their story matters, because now you're two people that are interested in each other. Your story now has weight and power, and you begin to have some of those conversations. Share your story. So bless, begin to pray, listen, eat, serve, share your story. Begin to pray, listen, eat, serve, share your story. Here's the caveat. Maybe you are the grass guru and like you are the lawnmower wizard. And so for you, it's so much easier to jump in and mow somebody's lawn than it is to have some of those beginning conversations. Or maybe you're the Malleys and you've got like cappuccino, espresso machine extraordinaire, and coffee is your jam. Do that. This is meant to be in order, but life doesn't happen in order. There's no illustration that I can give you. There's no acronym that I can give you that can be perfect. Life is out of order, and so if it's easier for you to start somewhere else, start there. But be intentional. Because I think where any of these things lose their power is when we're like, yep, I'm going to do it tomorrow, or when it happens. We need to be intentional with these things. Just like Jesus was intentional with Levi. He met him. He went into his house. That's intentionality. Some of you guys saw that map out there. Maybe you put your pin in it from last week. If you haven't done so, go stop out there and put your pin in your neighborhood. I think that's such a cool visual representation of the communities that we affect as Life Point. Here's what I want you to think about, though. What kind of change could we make if each one of us blessed somebody this week? No strings attached. We just blessed somebody. That's roughly 300 people who are going to be blessed. That's crazy. Just to think about that. If 300 people in our community were blessed because we chose to bless them, then we continued to bless them. Then eventually, maybe they start blessing someone else. So that 300 becomes 600. And then the 600 becomes 1,200. That 1,200 becomes 2,400. If you begin to bless the people around you, your communities will begin to look entirely different. Our city will begin to look entirely different. I would love to be the church that is known for being a blessing to people around us. I don't think anybody doesn't want to be that person. Wouldn't you love to be the person that's like, I know that person cares about me and they're going to bless me? See, that's what this is about right here. That's why we talk about blessed. That's why we talk about neighboring. That's why we talk about all of those things, because at the end of the day, you're living out what it means to be Jesus. Jesus met people on their turf. Jesus took the awkwardness. Jesus risked his reputation for people. How far are you willing to go to bless somebody?